Picture an ordinary morning. Bakers are sliding round loaves into hot stone ovens. Shopkeepers are rolling back their wooden shutters. Dogs doze in the sun. Water trickles through the streets from a public fountain. And a painter, halfway up a wall, dips his brush to finish a fresco that no one will ever see completed. Out beyond the rooftops stands a tall green mountain. It has vineyards on its slopes and not a wisp of smoke at its peak. Nobody in this town is afraid of it. Nobody even knows it's a volcano. This is the town of Pompeii on a bright morning almost 2,000 years ago. And by this time tomorrow, nearly every person in this scene will be running for their life, and the whole town will vanish from the face of the earth for 1,600 years. How did that happen? And here's the stranger question. How did this one terrible day end up teaching us more about ordinary Roman life than almost anything else in all of history? This is the story of the last day of Pompeii and how a catastrophe became a time capsule, how we got here. To understand the day it ended, you first have to picture the town as it lived. Pompeii sat in the south of Italy, near the curve of a beautiful bay, the Bay of Naples, where the Romans built seaside towns and wealthy families kept summer villas. It was a busy, prosperous place of perhaps 12 to 20,000 people. It had paved streets with stepping stones, so you could cross without getting your sandals wet. It had bakeries and laundries, taverns and bathhouses, a forum where people did business, and a great open arena. Its walls were covered in painted notices and scribbled graffiti, election posters, prices, jokes, the names of friends. And above it all rose Mount Vesuvius. To the people of Pompeii, the mountain was simply good land. Its volcanic soil was rich, perfect for grapevines, and its slopes were striped with farms and orchards. They had no word for volcano the way we do. They did not know that the mountain had erupted before long ago and that it was only sleeping. There had been one warning, though they didn't read it as one. Years earlier, a powerful earthquake had shaken the region and damaged the town badly. The people of Pompeii had simply rebuilt. They were still repairing the cracks when the real disaster came. In the days before the end, small tremors rattled cups and some wells ran dry, but the Romans were used to the ground trembling now and then. So life went on, which is exactly why the last day began like any other. Around midday, the mountain tore open. With a roar that could be heard for miles, Vesuvius blasted a column of ash, rock, and burning gas straight up into the sky. It rose higher and higher, many miles high, until it flattened out at the top and spread sideways. A young man watching from across the bay later described it perfectly. It looked, he wrote, like a great pine tree with a tall trunk that opened out into branches at the very top. That young man was Pliny the Younger, and his letters are the reason we know what this day actually felt like, because he lived to write them down. He was about 18, staying with his uncle at a naval base across the water, and he watched the whole thing unfold from a distance, hour by hour. For the people directly beneath that column, there was no safe distance. The wind was carrying the clouds straight toward Pompeii, and soon the sky above the town went dark and things began to fall. First came the ash, then came the pumice, small, light, pale stones of frothy volcanic rock raining down by the millions. At first it was strange, more than deadly. Pumice is light, a piece might sting but not kill. The trouble was that it did not stop. Hour after hour it fell until the streets were ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then deeper. It piled on rooftops. It buried gardens and blocked doorways. And as the hours passed, the sheer weight of it grew into something dangerous. Now the people of Pompeii had a terrible choice to make, and they had to make it in the dark, because the falling cloud had blotted out the sun. Some decided to flee, grabbing keys, coins, a lamp, one beloved object, and pushing out through streets filling with stone, trying to reach the gates and the road to the sea. Others decided to stay, sheltering indoors, waiting for it to end, hoping the storm of stone would pass like a storm of rain. Both choices were reasonable. Nobody had ever seen anything like this. Nobody knew the rules of a disaster that didn't even have a name. While Pompeii struggled in the dark, across the bay the other Pliny, Pliny the Elder, the young man's uncle, was doing something extraordinary. He was a famous scholar and the commander of the Roman fleet. When he first saw the strange cloud, his instinct was curiosity. He wanted a closer look. But then a message arrived begging for rescue, and curiosity turned into duty. He ordered the warships launched and sailed straight toward the danger, toward the falling ash and the burning shore, to try to carry people to safety. It was a brave thing to do, and it cost him his life. He reached the coast, helped where he could, and tried to calm the terrified people around him, but the air near the mountain had turned foul and hard to breathe, thick with ash and fumes, and Pliny the Elder died there near the shore. His nephew, watching and writing from across the water, would carry the memory of that night for the rest of his life. And because he wrote it down so honestly, the fear, the darkness, the crowds, the black cloud rolling over the sea, we can still stand beside him, in our imagination, 2,000 years later. For the people still in Pompeii, the night was the worst part. The ground shook. Roofs, loaded with tons of fallen pumice, groaned and gave way. The air was full of ash and the smell of sulfur. People moved by lamplight through streets they'd known their whole lives and could no longer recognize. Pliny the Younger, far across the bay, described families calling out for one another in the dark, children searching for parents, parents for children, and people becoming certain that the whole world was ending. And yet through the night, the falling stone began to ease. To anyone still alive and sheltering, it might have felt like the worst was finally over. They had survived the rain of stone. Surely now the mountain was spent. It was not. The deadliest part was still to come, and it would come fast. In the early hours of the next morning, the towering column above Vesuvius finally collapsed under its own weight. And when it fell, it sent something new down the mountainside, something far worse than falling stone. It was a surge, an avalanche of superheated ash and gas, hugging the ground, racing downhill faster than anyone could run. These surges are the truly lethal part of an eruption like this. They are scorching hot, and they move like a flood. The first ones struck the nearby seaside town of Herculaneum. Then, wave after wave, they reached Pompeii. In moments, it was over. The surges swept through the streets and sealed the town in a thick, hot blanket of ash. Whatever the storm of stone had spared, the surges did not. By the time the mountain fell quiet, Pompeii was simply gone, buried under something like 4 to 6 meters of volcanic debris. Roofs, streets, the forum, the temples, the painted walls, all of it under the ash. From the bay, you could no longer tell that a town had ever stood there at all. And here is where the saddest story in Roman history turns into the most astonishing one. Because the same ash that buried Pompeii also preserved it. Most ancient towns wear away slowly, stones get robbed for new buildings, wood rots, paint fades, and after 1,000 years almost nothing is left. But Pompeii wasn't worn away. It was sealed in a single day under an airtight blanket of ash and then forgotten. The world moved on. The land above went back to farmland. Even the name of the place faded into a vague memory. For 16 centuries, it waited. Then hundreds of years later, workers digging in the area began turning up walls, coins, and statues. Slowly, carefully, people began to dig the town back out of the ground, and what they found took their breath away. The ash had kept everything almost exactly as it had been on that last morning. Loaves of bread still sat in the ovens where the baker had left them. Pots of food waited on the counters of the little fast food shops. Paintings were still bright on the walls. There were gardens that left the shape of their roots, election posters, and that everyday scribbled graffiti. The small, human, throwaway words that almost never survived from the ancient world. And then came the most haunting discovery of all. In the hardened ash, the diggers kept finding empty hollow spaces. When they gently filled those spaces with plaster and eased them out, the plaster came up in the shape of a person, the exact shape of someone from that last day, captured in their final moment. These plaster casts are not bones or bodies. They are the space a person left behind in the ash. And they turned Pompeii from a ruin into something far more powerful. A reminder that this was not just a town, but thousands of real living people, with families and routines and ordinary plans for the next day. So what did we get from the last day of Pompeii? We got the single best window we have into how ordinary Romans actually lived. Not emperors and battles and grand monuments, but real daily life. What a normal kitchen looked like, what people ate for lunch and where they bought it, what they painted on their walls and scribbled by their doors, how a Roman street smelled and sounded and worked. Almost everything we know about everyday Roman life in that intimate, lived-in detail. We owe in large part to one town that was destroyed in an afternoon and sealed away whole. And that's the strange gift hidden inside the tragedy. A disaster erased Pompeii from the map, and at the very same moment, it saved Pompeii from being forgotten. The ash that ended the town is the only reason we can still walk its streets today. It makes you think about how much of any life is made of small, ordinary things: the loaf in the oven, the note by the door, the plans for a tomorrow that never comes. The people of Pompeii had no idea that their most ordinary morning would become the most studied day in ancient history. They were simply living, and because that one day was frozen in time, they are, in a way, still with us, still teaching us, still reminding us how very much like us they were. If you ever wondered how we got here, you're in the right place. See you in the next one.